China built a 500-meter megatelescope inside a mountain crater. Deep in the mountains of Guizhou province, Chinese engineers constructed a radio dish so massive it stretches over 1,600 feet across. That's wide enough to park a Nimitz-class aircraft carrier bow to stern inside it and still have room left over on every side. You heard that right. And this dish wasn't built to take pictures of the cosmos, it was built to listen to it. But before a single panel was placed, someone had to find the perfect hole in the ground, and that search alone took nearly a decade. The problem FAST was built to solve. You probably think of telescopes as instruments that help you see things. Lenses, mirrors, light, that's how most people picture them. But FAST doesn't see anything. It's not an optical telescope, it's a radio telescope, which means it doesn't collect light at all. It collects radio waves, invisible signals rippling through space at the speed of light, emitted by everything from dying stars to clouds of hydrogen gas drifting between galaxies. And if you want to understand why China built the largest single-dish radio telescope on Earth, you first need to understand the problem it was designed to solve. Radio signals from deep space are unimaginably faint. By the time they reach Earth, they've traveled millions or even billions of light years, weakening with every mile. A typical cell phone signal is a billion times stronger than the cosmic radio waves these telescopes are trying to pick up. That's not an exaggeration, that's the actual math. So how do you catch something that quiet? You build the biggest ear you possibly can. The larger the dish, the more signal it can gather, and the fainter the whisper it can hear. That's the fundamental rule of radio astronomy: sensitivity scales with size. For over 50 years, the biggest ear on Earth belonged to the Arecibo Observatory in Puerto Rico. Its dish measured roughly 1,000 feet across, and for decades, it defined the frontier of what humanity could detect in the radio spectrum. But Arecibo had limits. Its dish was fixed. It couldn't move or change shape, and its sky coverage was narrow. By the early 1990s, astronomers knew they were leaving signals on the table. Faint pulsars, distant hydrogen clouds, and the most delicate transmissions from deep space were slipping past undetected. That's when a Chinese astronomer named Nan Renong decided the world needed something bigger. In 1994, he put forward a proposal that most people thought was borderline insane: a radio dish 500 meters wide, almost twice the diameter of Arecibo, built not on a platform or a tower, but inside a natural depression in the Earth itself. His goal wasn't just to break a record. It was to cross a threshold of sensitivity that would unlock entirely new science signals so faint that no instrument in history had ever been capable of hearing them. But there was a catch. You can't just pour concrete and bolt together a 1,600-foot dish wherever you want. A structure that massive needs the planet itself to hold it up. Which meant before Nan Renong could build his telescope, he had to find the right hole in the ground, and that search would consume the next 12 years of his life. Finding the right hole in the ground. Think about what Nan Renong was actually asking for. He needed a natural bowl in the Earth's surface, not just any bowl, but one roughly 1,600 feet across, deep enough to cradle a dish without needing mountains of scaffolding. Shaped closely enough to a sphere that engineers wouldn't have to reshape the entire landscape, and located so far from civilization that the hum of a cell phone wouldn't ruin everything. That's not a shopping list you fill at a hardware store. That's a geological needle in a planetary haystack. Fortunately, nature had already done some of the work. Guizhou province, in southwestern China, sits on top of one of the largest karst landscapes on Earth. Over millions of years, rainwater had slowly dissolved the limestone bedrock, carving out hundreds of natural bowl-shaped depressions scattered across the mountains. On paper, it was the perfect hunting ground. In practice, it was a grueling search through some of the most rugged and remote terrain in China. No highways, no paved roads, just jagged peaks, dense vegetation, and tiny villages clinging to hillsides. Starting in 1994, Nan Renong and his team began surveying these depressions one by one. They analyzed over 390 candidates using satellite imaging, geographic modeling, and old-fashioned fieldwork hiking for hours through mud and limestone to inspect each site with their own eyes. They weren't just looking at shape and size. Every depression had to be tested for drainage because if rainwater pooled in the dish, it would destroy the reflective surface. Every site had to be measured for radio quietness because a single nearby town with television antennas or cell towers would flood the telescope with interference. And every location had to be checked for the surrounding terrain ideally, a ring of mountains that would act as a natural shield, blocking stray radio signals from the outside world. After 12 years of searching, they found it. The Daodang Depression in Pingtang County, a 45-million-year-old sinkhole cradled between three hills that formed an almost perfect equilateral triangle. The karst rock beneath it was porous, meaning rainwater would drain straight through instead of collecting on the surface. There were no towns within a 3-mile radius. The nearest county seat was over 15 miles away. It was, by every measure, the quietest and most geometrically perfect location on the planet for what they wanted to build. But choosing the site came with a cost. 65 families living in the valley, a tiny settlement called Greenwater Village, had to be relocated. And beyond that, over 9,000 people living within a 3-mile radius were eventually moved to make way for a radio quiet zone that would surround the telescope like a bubble of enforced silence. The Chinese government spent roughly $269 million on relocation, alone more than the telescope itself would cost to build. But securing the site was just the beginning of the nightmare. Because now, Nan Renong's team had to figure out how to build a dish the size of 30 football fields that could actually move, and that challenge would push engineering to its absolute limit. Engineering the dish 4,450 panels that move. Here's where things get really interesting, because you might assume that building the dish meant pouring a giant reflective surface into the crater and calling it a day. That's not even close to what happened. FAST's dish isn't a single solid structure. It's made up of 4,450 individual triangular aluminum panels, each about 36 feet on a side, fitted together like tiles in an enormous mosaic. And here's what makes it unlike any telescope ever built. The entire surface can change shape in real time. This was the breakthrough that separated FAST from everything that came before it. Arecibo's dish was locked into a fixed spherical curve. It couldn't adjust. If you wanted to observe a different part of the sky, you had to move the receiver overhead and hope the geometry worked out. FAST took a completely different approach. Beneath those 4,450 panels sits a cable net structure, 6,670 steel cables, woven into a grid and anchored to a massive ring beam around the crater's rim. At each of the 2,225 nodes where the cables intersect, a separate control cable drops down to a hydraulic actuator bolted into the crater floor. When those actuators pull or release tension on the cables, the mesh deforms and the panels mounted on top of it shift with it. What this means is that at any given moment, FAST can reshape a 1,000-foot section of its dish into a perfect parabola and aim it at a specific target in the sky. You're not moving the whole dish. You're sculpting it. The rest of the surface stays in its default spherical shape, while the active section locks onto whatever the astronomers want to observe. And as the Earth rotates and the target drifts, the actuators continuously adjust, reshaping the parabola in real time to track the signal across the sky. But here's the part that should make your jaw drop. This has to be done with a surface accuracy better than 2 millimeters, across a dish that spans 1,600 feet. That's like smoothing a bedsheet the size of a small town and making sure no wrinkle rises higher than the thickness of a coin. 2,225 actuators firing simultaneously, coordinated by a control system processing feedback from measurement sensors in real time, all while the target overhead keeps moving. The margin for error is essentially zero. And yet, even with the most precisely shaped dish on the planet, it's useless without something to catch the signals it focuses. That something weighs 30 tons, and it's dangling from cables nearly 500 feet in the air. The cabin in the sky. Now picture this. Nearly 500 feet above the dish, a 30-ton cabin hangs from 6 cables. No scaffolding, no tower underneath it. Just cables, anchored to 6 support towers ringing the crater, holding the entire receiver system in midair. This is the feed cabin, the brain of FAST, and everything the telescope collects is useless unless this cabin is sitting at the exact focal point of the parabola being shaped below it. That alone would be an engineering nightmare. But it gets harder, because the parabola isn't static. As you just learned, the dish is constantly reshaping itself to track targets across the sky, which means the focal point keeps moving too, so the feed cabin can't just hang there, it has to follow. 6 cables, controlled by winch servo mechanisms on each tower, adjust their lengths in real time to reposition the cabin as the dish shifts beneath it. You're essentially flying a 30-ton structure through the air on puppet strings, chasing an invisible point in space that never stops drifting. And here's what separates this from Arecibo. Arecibo's receiver platform was a 900-ton steel structure locked permanently in place above the dish. It didn't move. It couldn't move. That massive weight was one of the reasons the whole system eventually collapsed in 2020, when the support cables failed. FAST's designers threw that entire approach out the window. By replacing a rigid platform with a lightweight cable-driven cabin, they cut the weight by over 97% and gained the ability to steer the receiver across a much wider swath of sky. But even the cable system isn't precise enough on its own. Moving a cabin on 6 cables across distances of hundreds of feet can get you within a few centimeters of the target position. For radio astronomy, a few centimeters might as well be a mile. So inside the feed cabin sits a second adjustment system, a Stewart platform, which is essentially a 6-legged robotic stage that provides fine-tuning in all 6 degrees of freedom. It nudges the receiver into position with sub-millimeter accuracy, compensating for wind, cable sway, and any residual error from the main cable system. 2 layers of control working together, one coarse, one surgical to park a receiver at a precise point in empty air, hundreds of feet above a dish that's simultaneously changing shape underneath it. The engineering alone is staggering, but none of it means anything if the outside world bleeds in. Because the signals FAST is trying to hear are so impossibly faint that a single spark of human-made radio noise could drown them out entirely, and keeping that noise away would require silencing civilization itself. Silencing civilization. Here's something most people never think about. The cosmic signals FAST is designed to detect are so faint that they make a whisper sound like a thunderclap by comparison. A single cell phone, not a tower, not a broadcast antenna, just one phone in someone's pocket puts out a signal that is billions of times stronger than the radio waves arriving from a pulsar thousands of light years away. If you left your phone switched on within range of FAST, you might as well shine a floodlight directly into the lens of a camera trying to photograph a single candle on the far side of the Earth. The telescope would be completely blinded. So China did something drastic. They built a zone of enforced silence around FAST, layered like rings on a target. The innermost ring extends 3 miles out from the telescope in every direction. Inside that core zone, no electronic devices are permitted. No phones, no tablets, no radios, no drones, no wireless equipment of any kind. Step beyond that into the intermediate zone, which stretches from 3 to 6 miles out, and the restrictions loosen slightly, but electromagnetic emissions are still tightly regulated. Then there's the outer peripheral zone, reaching out to nearly 19 miles, where transmissions are monitored and controlled to prevent anything powerful enough to leak through to the dish. If you visit FAST as a tourist, and millions have since it opened, you surrender your phone before you enter. You're bussed in on approved vehicles. Monitoring stations scan the surrounding area for rogue signals, hunting for anything from a forgotten walkie-talkie to a malfunctioning piece of farm equipment. The mountains ringing the crater help enormously, acting as a natural wall that blocks outside interference. But as wireless technology spreads deeper into rural China, more cell towers, more satellites, more connected devices, in the hands of more people, maintaining that bubble of quiet gets harder every year. Even car ignition systems can emit radio noise. Even a spark plug firing at the wrong moment can corrupt a dataset that took hours to collect. This is the invisible war FAST fights every single day. Not against the emptiness of space, but against the noise of the civilization that built it. But none of that mattered if the science didn't deliver. The real question was always whether FAST could hear things no other telescope on Earth could hear. And the answer to that question has already started to rewrite what you thought you knew about the universe. What FAST hears: pulsars, bursts, and the search for someone else. This is where the telescope stops being an engineering project and starts being a discovery machine. Because since FAST became fully operational in 2020, it hasn't just performed well, it has outperformed every single-dish radio telescope on the planet. And the numbers aren't even close. Start with pulsars. These are the collapsed remains of massive stars that have died in supernova explosions, neutron stars, so dense that a teaspoon of their material would weigh over 1 billion tons. They spin at staggering speeds, some completing hundreds of rotations per second, and as they spin, they sweep beams of radio energy across space like cosmic lighthouses. If that beam happens to sweep across Earth, you can detect it as a repeating pulse, and that pulse tells you an enormous amount about the physics of extreme matter, magnetic fields, and even the fabric of space-time itself. Before FAST, the total number of known pulsars had been building slowly over decades, discovered by dozens of telescopes around the world. Then FAST entered the picture. In just a few years of operation, it has discovered over 1,100 new pulsars, more than every other telescope on the planet combined during the same period. Many of these are incredibly faint objects that no previous instrument was sensitive enough to detect. Some are millisecond pulsars, spinning so fast and so precisely that they can be used as natural clocks accurate enough to help detect gravitational waves rippling through the galaxy. Others sit in binary systems, locked in orbital dances with companion stars, offering rare windows into how neutron stars form and evolve. With only about a quarter of its planned survey area completed, FAST is just getting started. Then there are fast radio bursts, one of the most baffling phenomena in modern astronomy. These are millisecond-long explosions of radio energy originating from billions of light-years away. They flare once, blast out as much energy in a fraction of a second as the sun produces in an entire year, and then vanish. Nobody knows exactly what causes them. Theories range from highly magnetized neutron stars called magnetars to collisions between exotic stellar remnants. Most fast radio bursts happen once and are never seen again. But a handful repeat, and FAST has been instrumental in studying those repeaters. It has detected thousands of individual bursts from a single repeating source alone, giving astronomers the most detailed dataset ever assembled on these mysterious signals and helping to constrain the models that try to explain what produces them. And then there's the question most people are secretly wondering about. FAST joined the Breakthrough Listen project in 2016, one of the most ambitious searches for extraterrestrial intelligence ever launched. Its sensitivity means it could theoretically detect something as modest as an airport radar system operating several light-years away. Nobody is claiming aliens are out there. But if someone or something is broadcasting, FAST is the best ear humanity has ever built to pick up that call. It's not science fiction. It's the logical extension of building the most sensitive listening device on Earth and pointing it at the sky. But all of this science rests on a single advantage: raw, unmatched sensitivity. And that advantage didn't come from clever software or a better algorithm. It came from size. Why size is everything. You've now seen what FAST can do, but it's worth stepping back and understanding why it can do it, because the answer is deceptively simple. FAST's entire advantage comes down to one thing: collecting area. Its effective collecting area is more than 2.5 times that of Arecibo, which for over 50 years held the title of the most sensitive single-dish telescope on Earth. That ratio translates directly into sensitivity. More area means more signal gathered, which means fainter objects detected, which means deeper reach into the universe. FAST can survey the sky 5 to 10 times faster than Arecibo could, and it covers roughly twice the sky, thanks to its active dish and movable feed cabin. When Arecibo collapsed in 2020, its 900-ton receiver platform crashing through the dish after decades of wear and hurricane damage, FAST didn't just become the biggest single-dish radio telescope in the world. It became the only one in its class. There is no backup. There is no equivalent. If FAST went offline tomorrow, the specific science it does would simply stop. That said, FAST isn't perfect. It's a single dish, not an array. Telescope arrays, like the Very Large Array in New Mexico or the upcoming Square Kilometer Array, spread across multiple continents, can achieve far sharper angular resolution, the ability to distinguish between two closely spaced objects in the sky. FAST can't compete with that. Its resolution is actually several times worse than the human eye. What it trades in sharpness, though, it makes up for in raw listening power. It hears things nothing else can hear. And in radio astronomy, where you're hunting for signals that have been fading across billions of light years of empty space, hearing faint is everything. But FAST isn't just an instrument, it's a statement, and what it says about China's ambitions in science is just as important as what it hears from the cosmos. The man who listened first. FAST took 22 years to go from a proposal on paper to a functioning telescope. It cost $180 million to build. Over 9,000 people were relocated to protect it. Thousands of engineers, scientists, and laborers worked in some of the most remote and punishing terrain in China to make it real. And in 2021, China opened it to the global scientific community, a signal that this wasn't just a national trophy, but a tool built for all of humanity. But there's one part of this story that most people never hear. Nan Renong, the man who dreamed up FAST, who spent 12 years hiking through mountains to find the right crater, who fought for funding, led the engineering, and oversaw every major decision from concept to completion, died on September 15, 2017. Lung cancer. He was 72 years old. FAST had achieved first light just 1 year earlier. He lived long enough to see his telescope open its eye, but not long enough to see what it would find. Every pulsar FAST has discovered, every fast radio burst it has captured, every whisper from deep space it has recorded, all of it has come after the man who made it possible was gone. China honored him with the title Role Model of Our Times. They named an asteroid after him, and his team kept going, because stopping was never something Nan Renong built into the plan. And today, his telescope sits quietly in that same crater in Guizhou, a half-kilometer ear pressed against the universe, surrounded by silence, doing exactly what Nan Renong designed it to do. Not to shout, not to transmit, not to announce humanity's presence to the cosmos, just to listen, deeper and more patiently than anything ever built before. It doesn't produce glamorous photographs. It doesn't light up the night sky. Most people will never even know it's there. But right now, at this very moment, it is picking up signals that left their source before life on Earth even existed. Because that was always the point. You don't build the most sensitive instrument on Earth to talk. You build it because somewhere out there, something might already be speaking, and until now, you simply didn't have the ears to hear it.